I am William, and tonight we journey into one of history's most fascinating and darkest stories. It's a tale that still sends shivers down the spines of many today, and yet it's been largely forgotten in the annals of time. But before we delve into the details, let me ask you this. Did you know that on November 18, 1978, over 900 American citizens, including men, women and children, willingly— that's right, in the depths of the Guyanese jungle, Jim Jones led his followers, the People's Temple, to their deaths in one of the most horrific mass murders in modern history. The sheer scale of this tragedy is still difficult to comprehend. Imagine, if you will, a charismatic leader able to bend the minds and actions of hundreds of people till— Jones was that man. Born James Warren Jones on May 13, 1931, he began his ministry as a preacher in Indiana, but soon attracted followers with his promise of social justice and equality. Over time, however, his teachings became increasingly extreme, drawing criticism from mainstream America. But what drives someone to such extremes? Why would hundreds of people, mostly American citizens, blindly follow their leader into the heart of darkness? To understand this twisted tale, we'll be speaking to experts who will shed light on Jones's background and how he manipulated those around him. We'll also examine the role of ideology and the pressures of 1970s America in shaping these events. As we begin our journey into this forgotten history, you may ask yourself, could such a catastrophe happen again? The answer is unsettling. Yes, it can. With social media amplifying extremist ideologies and charismatic leaders gaining followers online, the world is still vulnerable to such tragedies. Tonight's story serves as a stark reminder that even in modern times, the seeds of destruction sown by one man or woman can spread far beyond their own circle. So join me on this unsettling exploration into the dark corners of human nature. We'll uncover the tangled web of events leading up to November 18, 1978, and examine why Jonestown remains a cautionary tale for our times. As we delve deeper into the story of Jim Jones and the People's Temple, it's essential to understand the man behind the charisma. Born in Indiana, Jones was raised by his mother, Lynetta Putman, who was deeply involved in Christian Science and spiritualism. His father, James Thurman Jones, abandoned the family. Jim was just a child, leaving his mother to raise him alone. This early life experience would later shape his views on family and community. Jones attended college at Butler University, dropped out to pursue a career in ministry. He began as a preacher in the 1950s, drawing followers with his promise of social justice and equality. However, it was during this period that he started experimenting with various forms of psychotherapy, including hypnosis and self-hypnosis. These techniques would later become integral components of his methods for controlling his followers. By the late 1960s, Jones had attracted a significant following in Indianapolis. He continued to build his reputation as a social justice advocate, using his charisma to draw attention from local media outlets. His message of equality and love resonated with many disillusioned Americans who felt disconnected from mainstream society. But what drove Jones's increasingly extreme behavior? Researchers have suggested that he suffered from bipolar disorder, or possibly even schizophrenia. It's also been proposed that he had a deep-seated fear of being rejected or losing control, which led him to cling to his followers for a sense of validation and power. One of the most disturbing aspects of Jones's leadership was his use of tactics commonly associated with cults: emotional manipulation, isolation from family and friends, and mind games. He would often use guilt trips to exploit his followers' vulnerabilities, making them feel like they owed him their loyalty and obedience. Those who dared to question his authority were subjected to public humiliation or even physical punishment. As we speak to experts about the rise of Jim Jones's People's Temple, it becomes clear that this is more than just a story about one man. It's a cautionary tale about how charismatic leaders can manipulate entire communities, using their followers' fears and vulnerabilities to justify horrific acts. One of the most poignant aspects of this tragedy was the involvement of children within the cult. Many were born or adopted by Jones himself, who would often about the importance of family and community. Behind closed doors, these children faced physical and emotional abuse, forced to participate in rituals that involved their parents drinking poisonous concoctions. With tensions rising between Jones and his followers, a group known as the Temple Defense Forces began to organize resistance against their leaders' increasingly erratic behavior. It was too late. On November 18, 1978, the unthinkable happened. The Guyanese government had grown wary of Jones's activities in Jonestown, and a team led by Lieutenant Robert Bingham descended upon the settlement. Jones saw this as an opportunity to stage one final act of defiance against the evil he perceived outside. Gathering his followers in the community center, he handed out cups filled with the poisonous concoction made from cyanide-laced Kool-Aid. In a heart-wrenching finale, hundreds would die, leaving behind only a handful of survivors who would be left to piece together the events of that fateful day. In the aftermath of Jonestown, many questions remained unanswered. What drove Jones's followers to such extreme devotion? How could one man manipulate so many minds and actions? As we reflect on this tragedy, we're reminded that the seeds of destruction can spread far beyond their own circle, and it's a threat that still looms over us today. In our next segment, we'll examine the role of ideology in shaping Jones's extreme behavior. We'll delve into his radical reinterpretation of Christian scripture and explore how his vision for social justice became twisted into a call for mass sacrifice. The late 1970s, a time of great social change in the United States. The civil rights movement had given way to the feminist movement, as women began to challenge traditional roles and expectations. This backdrop of progress, a darker shadow loomed. A sense of disillusionment and discontent had taken hold among many Americans. Disconnection from mainstream society was on the rise. Young people felt increasingly disenchanted with the establishment, searching for answers in alternative lifestyles and counterculture movements. It's against this complex tapestry that Jim Jones's People's Temple emerged as a beacon of hope for those seeking a more equal and just society. The 1970s were also an era of great social experimentation. Americans were eager to redefine family structures, question traditional authority, and push boundaries of what was deemed acceptable. The concept of community living became increasingly popular, with communes springing up across the country. These collective households aimed to create a more egalitarian society, where individuals could live in harmony and pursue their passions without being tied down by material possessions or societal expectations. But amidst this era of experimentation, one question lingers. How do we define the boundaries between utopian ideals and outright manipulation? Can charismatic leaders genuinely inspire change? Or are they merely exploiting our deepest desires for a sense of belonging? As we delve into the world of Jonestown, Guyana, in November 1978, it's essential to appreciate the rich cultural context that existed at the time. The town itself was born out of British colonialism. Its name derived from John Moscoso, the founder of the region. By the late 1970s, Jonestown had become a melting pot of sorts, an eclectic mix of Guyanese, African American, and Caribbean cultures. Life in Jonestown was marked by hard work and discipline. The community operated under strict rules, with residents adhering to a rigid schedule that included daily labor, communal meals, and regular gatherings for socializing and spiritual growth. Residents were encouraged to contribute their skills and talents to the collective, whether it be farming, construction, or education. But beneath this facade of community living lay a complex web of psychological manipulation. Jim Jones's influence was all-pervasive, with his words and actions carefully crafted to keep his followers in line. Children within the commune were often separated from their families, taken under Jones's wing as part of his own family. He would preach about the importance of family bonds and community, but behind closed doors, abuse and exploitation were rampant. The 1970s were also an era of significant social change for African Americans. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 had outlawed segregation in public accommodations, while the Voting Rights Act of 1965 ensured that African American voices could be heard at the ballot box. But despite these advances, racism remained a potent force in American society. As we explore Jonestown through this lens, it's essential to acknowledge the racial dynamics at play. Many African Americans saw Jones as a liberator, someone who promised them equality and respect within his all-black community. Yet, beneath this rhetoric of social justice lay a complex web of psychological manipulation, with followers encouraged to surrender their individuality in favor of a more cohesive, collectivist identity. Now, let's visit the nearby town of Georgetown, Guyana's capital city. This bustling metropolis is a testament to the country's rich cultural heritage, a blend of African, Asian, and European influences that has created a unique melting pot. But amidst the vibrant markets and colourful streets lies a more sinister reality. The government had grown increasingly wary of Jones's activities in Jonestown. In the months leading up to November 1978, tensions between Jones and his followers began to escalate. The Guyanese government, aware of the situation, was putting pressure on Jones to reform or relocate. But as we know, it would take a catastrophic event to reveal the full extent of Jones's true intentions. As we reflect on this period in history, one question lingers: how can we prevent such tragedies from recurring? Can we learn from the mistakes of the past and create a more resilient society that is less vulnerable to manipulation by charismatic leaders? The answers lie not just in understanding the complexities of human psychology, but also in acknowledging our own vulnerabilities as a society. In our next segment, we'll examine the role of ideology in shaping Jones's extreme behavior. We'll delve into his radical reinterpretation of Christian scripture and explore how his vision for social justice became twisted into a call for mass sacrifice. But for now, let us pause and reflect on the eerie atmosphere that pervaded Jonestown in those final days. An atmosphere of dread and foreboding that foreshadowed the unimaginable tragedy to come. As we delve deeper into the psyche of Jones, it becomes clear that his ideology was a masterful blend of Christianity, socialism, and self-help principles. He presented himself as a messianic figure, claiming to have been chosen by God to lead his people out of the wilderness of racism and oppression in America. His sermons were a mix of fire and brimstone warnings about the dangers of capitalism and social inequality, interspersed with promises of redemption and salvation who followed him. Jones's interpretation of Christianity was unconventional, to say the least. He drew heavily from Christian scriptures, but twisted their meanings to suit his own agenda. He claimed that Jesus himself had ordained him as a Messiah-like figure, tasked with guiding his flock through the treacherous waters of modern society. This warped theology created a sense of urgency and exclusivity among his followers, who felt chosen by God for this special mission. But what drove Jones's extreme behavior? What fueled his increasingly erratic and tyrannical leadership style? To answer these questions, we must examine the complex web of psychological manipulation he employed to control his followers. At its core was a clever use of emotional leverage, leveraging fear, guilt, and paranoia to keep his flock in line. Jones's methods were ruthless and effective. He used isolation as a tool to break down individual identities and create a collective psyche that would conform to his vision. Followers were forced to surrender their possessions, family ties, and personal freedoms, all in the name of the greater good. Those who resisted or questioned Jones's authority were subjected to intense pressure, often culminating in public humiliation, even physical punishment. The most tragic aspect of this story is the sheer number of innocent lives lost. Over 900 people, including hundreds of children, gave their lives in a single fateful day. The exact circumstances of that event are still shrouded in controversy. But one thing is certain: Jones's followers were led to believe that their deaths would be a sacrifice for the greater good, a radical act of social justice that would. As we reflect on this tragedy, it's essential to acknowledge the role of societal factors in creating an environment conducive to such manipulation. The civil rights movement had created a sense of disillusionment among many Americans, particularly African Americans, who felt excluded from mainstream society. Jones tapped into these frustrations, using his charisma and rhetoric to create a sense of belonging and purpose. But what about the Guyanese government? How did they allow this situation to unfold on their soil? The answer lies in a combination of economic and cultural factors. Guyana was one of the poorest countries in South America, with a struggling economy and limited infrastructure. Jones's promise of economic self-sufficiency and social justice resonated deeply with many Guyanese who felt marginalized by their own government. As we move forward from this dark chapter in human history, it's crucial to recognize both the dangers of unchecked power and the allure of charismatic leaders. Can we create a society that is more resilient to manipulation? One that values individuality and diversity over collective identity? The answers are not easy, but by examining the complex web of psychological and societal factors at play in Jonestown, we may just find a way forward. In our next segment, we'll explore the aftermath of this tragedy, how it shook the world and led to significant changes in social psychology and emergency response protocols. November 18th, 1978, a day that will forever be etched in the annals of human history. It was a morning like any other in Jonestown, Guyana, but beneath the surface, a sense of unease hung in the air. The once thriving community, built on the promise of a better life for its residents, had become a hotbed of fear and paranoia. As the sun rose over the dense jungle, families began to stir, unaware of the events that would unfold. But one person knew what was coming: Jim Jones, the self-proclaimed Messiah who had brought his flock to this remote corner of South America. He stood at the helm, guiding his followers with a steely gaze, as if reading their deepest fears. Behind closed doors, a sense of dread had been building for months. Rumors of an impending doom spread like wildfire through the community, fueled by Jones's cryptic warnings and prophecies. Many sensed that something was terribly wrong, but the fear of losing their leader, their way of life, held them back from questioning his authority. The seeds of this tragedy had been sown years earlier in California, where Jim Jones had first begun to assemble his flock. Born James Warren Jones on May 13, 1931, he was a charismatic preacher with a knack for manipulation. His ability to weave tales of salvation and redemption drew people from all walks of life, but particularly African Americans who felt disenfranchised by mainstream society. In the early 1970s, Jones's People's Temple had become a beacon of hope for many, offering a sense of community and purpose in a world torn apart by racial tension. But as his influence grew, so did his ego, and with it, his tactics became increasingly sinister. He began to demand absolute loyalty from his followers, using guilt trips and emotional blackmail to control their every move. By 974, Jones had set his sights on Guyana, a fledgling nation in need of investment and development. The country's fragile economy and lack of infrastructure made it an attractive location for his vision of a utopian community, a place where people could live in harmony with nature, free from the corrupting influences of the first waves of settlers arrived in Jonestown in 1974, drawn by Jones's promises of land, food, and shelter. They were predominantly African Americans, but also included some Caucasians and Latin Americans who shared his vision for a new society. As they settled into their makeshift homes, Jones began to weave a narrative of collective identity, fostering a sense of belonging among the group. However, beneath this facade, a culture of fear and intimidation thrived. Those who questioned Jones's authority were subjected to public shaming or even physical punishment. Families were forced to surrender their possessions, and individuals were encouraged to sever ties with their loved ones outside the community. One such person was Deborah Layton, a 19-year-old woman who had joined the People's Temple in 1972. She would later become one of the few survivors of the Jonestown Massacre, but at that moment, she was trapped in a world of fear and coercion. As she looked around her, she saw families torn apart by Jones's machinations, children separated from their parents, siblings forced to spy on each other. Deborah knew she had to escape, but every door led back to Jones. He had become an omnipresent figure in Jonestown, monitoring every move and conversations. Those who dared to resist were dealt with swiftly and mercilessly, their fate often sealed within the labyrinth corridors of the jungle settlement. As we look back on this tragic tale, it's essential to acknowledge the role of greed and power in its unfolding. Jones had become a master manipulator, using his charisma and oratory skills to keep his flock enthralled. He promised them a share in the community's wealth and a place at the forefront of history. All they needed to do was surrender their individuality and submit to his authority. But what about the Guyanese government? How did they allow this situation to unfold on their soil? In the mid-1970s, Guyana's economy was teetering on the brink of collapse, with its main export, bauxite, struggling to compete in the global market. The country desperately needed foreign investment. Jones had promised the People's Temple would be self-sufficient, and as a result, he secured significant investment from his followers. The government turned a blind eye, eager for the economic benefits that came with Jonestown's arrival. They saw Jones as a visionary, a man who could bring about a new era of prosperity to their struggling nation. But beneath this facade, the seeds of disaster were sown. Jones had created a culture of dependency, where his followers relied on him for every aspect of their lives. When he promised them a utopian society, they believed it with all their hearts. And, by extension, they believed him. As we move forward from this dark chapter in human history, the question remains, what drove Jones's extreme behavior? Was it sheer ego, or was there something more sinister at play? The answer lies in a complex web of psychological manipulation, which we will explore in greater detail as our story unfolds. But for now, let us focus on the human element, the fear, the greed, and the betrayal that consumed Jonestown. The events of November 18, 1978, were about to unfold like a tragedy written by some malevolent force. The stage was set for one of history's most heinous crimes, where over 900 people would lose their lives in a single fateful day. But what led up to this catastrophe? What factors contributed to the downfall of this once thriving community? We'll explore these questions and more as we delve deeper into the story of Jonestown. But now, let's remember the faces behind the tragedy. Deborah Layton, who fought to escape, Jim Jones, the master manipulator, and the countless souls who fell victim to his machinations. The clock is ticking. As we delve deeper into the story of Jonestown, it's essential to understand the cult-like atmosphere that permeated every aspect of People's Temple life. Members were encouraged to surrender their individuality, embracing a collective identity as one big family. Jones would often refer to his followers as "my children," cultivating a sense of paternal control and dependence. This psychological manipulation was further reinforced by the use of propaganda and brainwashing techniques. Jones had created a complex system where members were divided into different groups, each with their specific roles and responsibilities. These groups were then pitted against one another in competitions, fostering an environment of competition and loyalty to the leader rather than to themselves. This created a hierarchical structure that discouraged dissent and encouraged mindless obedience. To further reinforce his control, Jones exploited the vulnerabilities of his followers, many of whom had been drawn to the People's Temple due to their emotional fragility or personal crises. He preyed on their trust, using it as leverage to manipulate them into doing his bidding. Those who questioned his motives or challenged his authority were often shunned or punished. One example of this manipulation was the voluntary relocation of People's Temple members from San Francisco to Jonestown in 1974. Under the guise of establishing a utopian community, Jones convinced his followers that they would be creating a new society, free from the constraints and corruptions of Western society. However, what he had actually planned was a massive migration to Guyana, where he could exert total control over his followers. As we examine the leading up to the tragedy, it becomes clear that Jones's actions were motivated by a toxic mix of charisma, narcissism, and paranoia. He was convinced that a communist revolution would soon sweep across the United States, and Jonestown was seen as a refuge from this impending catastrophe. His followers, who had surrendered their autonomy and individuality, had no concept of what lay ahead. Deborah Layton, Jones's victims, described her own experience in a chilling testimony. "I was trapped in a world where the truth was whatever Jim Jones said it was. I saw people being tortured, beaten, and murdered. I also saw the faces of those who had surrendered to Jim's control. They were willing to die for him because they believed that if they did, they would be saved from this terrible world." The eerie calm that pervaded Jonestown in the months leading up to November 18th was a stark contrast to the chaos and terror that would soon. The followers, brainwashed into accepting their fate, seemed resigned to their destiny, as if awaiting a divine reckoning. Meanwhile, Jones's inner circle had become increasingly concerned about the growing scrutiny from US authorities. They knew that the People's Temple was under investigation for suspected tax evasion and other financial irregularities. Jim Jones's solution, a mass murder-suicide pact that would eliminate any potential witnesses and ensure his followers' loyalty beyond the grave. In Jonestown, the die had been cast. The clock ticked on, each passing day a countdown to catastrophe. As we move forward in our story, the pieces will come together like a jigsaw puzzle. We'll witness the final, desperate acts of survival by those who tried to escape. The sinister games of deception played out between Jones and his closest followers, and the horrific events that would shake the world on November 18th, 19. The stage was set for one of history's darkest moments, a chilling testament to the dangers of blind devotion, groupthink, and the catastrophic consequences of unchecked power. November 5th, 1978, dawned in Jonestown, Guyana, with a sense of unease hanging over the makeshift community. The air was thick with tension, as Jim Jones's inner circle frantically worked to silence any potential defectors or whistleblowers. For months, they had been monitoring the comings and goings of Temple members, searching for anyone who might betray them. Lyle Blackburn, a young and ambitious journalist, had recently gained access to Jonestown by posing as a sympathetic outsider. His intention was to expose Jones's regime, but unbeknownst to him, he was being closely watched by the People's Temple security team. What do we know about this guy? Rachel Talmadge, one of Jones's most trusted lieutenants, asked her colleague, Vernon Gosney, as they pored over Blackburn's files. "Doesn't sound like your average traveler. He could be trouble," Gosney warned. "We need to keep a close eye on him." Meanwhile, in the heart of Jonestown, Jim Jones addressed his congregation from the makeshift stage, attempting to assuage their fears about the growing scrutiny from US authorities. "Brothers and sisters, do not worry about what's happening outside these walls," he said. "We have built a safe haven here, and we will protect ourselves from any harm." However, as the sun rose over Jonestown, it became clear that Jones was planning something more sinister than just defensive measures. Behind closed doors, his inner circle had devised a radical solution to eliminate potential threats. A mass exodus of temple members would be sent to Brazil, while those deemed loyal and expendable would remain. The operation, codenamed Passage to Freedom, aimed to clear the way for Jones's remaining followers to build an autonomous community free from government interference. However, this plan relied on a critical mass of loyalists, something that had been dwindling steadily as defectors continued to flee Jonestown. "We can't afford any more deserters," Rachel Talmadge exclaimed during a heated meeting with the inner circle. "Not now, when everything hangs in the balance." "Agreed," Jones nodded gravely. "It's time to take drastic measures." The following morning, November 16, Jim Jones ordered his closest advisors to prepare a select group of temple members for departure to Guyana's remote Kaituma. Those selected, men and women who had demonstrated unwavering devotion to the People's Temple, were told they would be joining the Brazilian contingent on a journey that promised redemption. Their leader, Annette Carter, was instructed by Jones himself to oversee this new initiative. "You will carry my message of hope and redemption to those in Brazil. They need our presence now more than ever." However, an air of skepticism hung over the small group selected for Kaituma. What would they really be doing there? Were they being sent as a safeguard, or merely as pawns to keep watch on any potential trouble? Back in Jonestown's main camp, Lyle Blackburn remained under surveillance by the temple security team. As he conducted interviews with temple members, their words and expressions spoke volumes about the inner workings of this troubled community. "I love Jim," a young woman named Susan said, tears streaming her face. "He understands me better than anyone. But I'm scared. Something's not right here." Blackburn's expression remained neutral, but his mind was racing with questions. What secrets were these people hiding? And what exactly lay in store for those who dared defy Jim Jones? On November 10th, a group of 8 temple members made the long and arduous journey to Kaituma, amidst increasing unease among their comrades left behind in Jonestown. Their mission was shrouded in mystery, but it seemed likely that they would play a crucial role in clearing the way for Jones's planned mass exodus. What did Annette Carter know about the true purpose of this trip? Were these selected few merely being sent as unwitting messengers, or pawns in a far more sinister game? As night fell over Jonestown, Jim Jones addressed his dwindling congregation with one final ominous warning. The time for departure draws near. We must be prepared to face what lies ahead. In the shadows, whispers of dissent had begun to spread among the loyalists left behind. Those who sensed something was terribly wrong. Would they soon be called upon to fulfill their ultimate duty? Or would some brave soul manage to expose the horrific truth in time? The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of Jonestown. As the sun rose over Jonestown on November 18th, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Jim Jones had warned his followers that the moment of departure was near, and many were packed and ready to leave at a moment's notice. But for Annette Carter and her group of 8 temple members, who had travelled to Kaituma just days before, their mission remained shrouded in mystery. Back in Jonestown, Lyle Blackburn continued his interviews with temple members, seeking to understand the dynamics at play within this complex and troubled community. He spoke with a young man named David, who described the all-consuming grip that Jim Jones had on his family's life. "My parents are completely under his control," David said, his voice laced with concern. "They do whatever he says, without question. I'm not sure if they even care about what happens to me anymore." Blackburn's observations were echoed by Susan, the young woman who had tearfully expressed her devotion to Jim Jones just days before. Now, she seemed more subdued, and Blackburn sensed a deep-seated fear lurking beneath her words. "I love Jim," she repeated, "but I'm scared of what might happen if we leave here. What if something bad happens to us?" Meanwhile, at Kaituma, Annette Carter's group had arrived at the remote airstrip, their mission still unclear. They were joined by a small team of temple security personnel, who seemed more interested in keeping watch on the surrounding jungle than attending to any perceived threats from within. As the day wore on, Blackburn became increasingly aware that something was amiss. The air was thick with an eerie sense of anticipation, and many temple members seemed on edge, as if waiting for a signal to leave. When he pressed one of them, a quiet, reserved woman named Sarah, about their departure plans, she hesitated before responding. "We're just waiting for Jim's word." The sent shivers down Blackburn's spine. Waiting for Jim's word. What exactly did that mean? And what lay in store for these innocent people if they were to leave Jonestown behind? As the sun began to set over the jungle, a sense of unease settled over the entire community. Jones had promised his followers that their departure would be swift and painless, but the whispered rumors of mass murder, of a plan to kill themselves rather than face the outside world, seemed increasingly plausible. And then, without warning, Jim Jones appeared on the makeshift stage in Jonestown's main square, his eyes blazing with an unnerving intensity. "My children," he began, his voice dripping with emotion, "the time for our exodus is upon us. We will leave this place behind and start anew in our promised land of Guyana." But as Blackburn watched the scene unfold before him, a chilling realization dawned on him. Jim Jones had not chosen to send the net. Their true purpose was far more sinister, and one that would ultimately seal their fate alongside the thousands of other temple members in Jonestown. The die had been cast. The next move was up to Jim Jones, a man who, just hours from now, would bring about one of the most acts of mass murder in modern history. As Jim Jones stood on the main stage, his eyes burning with an unnerving intensity, a collective shiver ran down the spines of those gathered before him. The air was heavy with anticipation, and the sense of unease that had been building all day reached a fever pitch. "We will leave this place behind," Jones continued, his voice dripping with emotion, "and start anew in our promised land of Guyana." But as he spoke, it became clear that something was amiss. The language was familiar, eerily so to those who had heard Jones's previous speeches promising a new beginning for the temple. What was unfolding before their eyes was not an exodus, but a carefully constructed illusion. Behind the scenes, a sinister plot was taking shape, one that would soon lead to unimaginable tragedy. Back in 1974, Jim Jones had founded the People's Temple, initially presenting himself as a champion of social justice and equality. But over the years, he had become increasingly obsessed with power and control, drawing his followers into a cult-like vortex from which there was no escape. One key figure who played a crucial role in this story is Deborah Layton, a young woman who joined the temple in 1972. She became embroiled in the inner workings of the organization, witnessing firsthand Jones' tactics of manipulation and control. "I had been trained to do whatever he asked," Layton would later testify, to be loyal only to him. But as she delved deeper into the temple's operations, she began to realize the true nature of Jones' leadership. She saw how he exploited his followers, using guilt, fear, and intimidation to maintain control. Layton eventually defected from the temple in 1978, just months before the fateful events in Jonestown. Her testimony would later prove invaluable, shedding light on the inner workings of the cult and its leaders' sinister intentions. As Jones continued his speech in the jungle square, a small group of loyal followers watched with bated breath. Among them was one individual who had been tasked with overseeing the temple's operations. Tim Reiterman, a journalist and investigator who had been embedded within the People's Temple for months. Reiterman would later recall that Jones' words were laced with an underlying message. "We must be prepared to face the consequences of our actions." What he meant by this statement was far from clear, but it sent shivers down Reiterman's spine. It seemed as though Jones was hinting at a plan far more sinister than mere departure. Back in 1977, Jones had made his first attempt establishing a new settlement in Guyana, where the government had granted him large tracts of land. However, this effort ended in disaster when over 600 followers were forced to flee the area after violent clashes with local residents and authorities. It was then that Jones began planning something far more sinister, an operation codenamed Operation Dawn. This clandestine project involved creating a new settlement deep within the Guyanese jungle, where as the months passed, rumors began circulating about a secret facility being built in Jonestown. Intelligence agencies had been monitoring Jones' activities, suspicious of his connections to communist governments and potential plans for an underground colony. The CIA had even established a surveillance post nearby, monitoring Jones every night. However, their efforts were ultimately hampered by the lack of concrete evidence and the enigmatic leader's ability to manipulate those around him. Jones' plan was no longer about finding a new home, but creating a prison-like environment where he could control his followers with an iron fist. And so, in the dead of night on November 17, 1978, a group of trusted temple members set out for Jonestown's infamous White Night, an event that would forever change the course of history. But what exactly happened during those fateful hours? Did Jones truly believe his followers were going to kill themselves in mass? Or was this merely a desperate attempt to avoid being apprehended by authorities? The truth is far more complex and disturbing. As we delve deeper into the events leading up to Jonestown, it becomes clear that Jones's motives went beyond mere control. They involved an unhinged desire for self-preservation. It's often argued that Jones was driven by a fear of persecution and imprisonment. His paranoia had reached new heights as he sensed that his followers were beginning to defect and the authorities closing in. But what role did other factors play? Theories abound regarding Jones' connections with communist governments, particularly Cuba and Nicaragua. Some speculate that he planned to establish an underground colony where his followers could serve as a military force for these countries. One individual who played a pivotal role in this story is Don Shellhart, a local Guyanese farmer whose land Jones had claimed as part of the settlement. Shellhart would later testify about the numerous attempts by Jones's men to purchase large tracts of land and cultivate it with an air of secrecy. As the clock ticked closer to midnight on that fateful day, an ominous sense of unease settled over Jonestown. The words, White Night, took on a chilling new meaning as Jones led his followers in a mass ritual of self-administered cyanide poisoning, ending the lives of 918 innocent. The world would later learn about this atrocity through the testimony of Deborah Layton and other survivors who managed to escape the carnage. But one lesser-known aspect is the involvement of local authorities, particularly Guyana's former president, Forbes Burnham. Burnham had long been criticised for his role in allowing Jones's operation to flourish, despite being aware of its true nature. His administration seemed more concerned with avoiding international scrutiny than protecting the rights and safety of their citizens. Today, parallels can be drawn between Jonestown and other modern cults that have gained notoriety, from the Branch Davidians at Waco to more recent cases in South America. The psychology behind these groups is often rooted in a deep-seated desire for belonging and a sense of purpose, exploited by charismatic leaders who promise an idealized world. And so, as we reflect on the tragic events that unfolded in Jonestown, it becomes clear that this catastrophe was not just a product of one man's twisted mind, but also a symptom of broader societal issues. In the words of historian Richard Noy, Jonestown is an uncomfortable reminder that we live in a world where totalitarian regimes can thrive. It serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power. As we close this chapter on one of history's darkest chapters, it's essential to recognize both the lessons and warnings. The Jonestown Massacre was not an isolated event, but rather a culmination of factors that had been building for years. Jim Jones, the charismatic leader of People's Temple, had been attracting followers in California since the 1950s. Initially, his message of social justice and equality resonated with many African Americans who felt marginalized by mainstream society. However, as time passed, Jones' rhetoric became increasingly radicalized, and he began to cultivate a cult-like atmosphere within the organization. Jones' tactics were often shrouded in mystery, but one thing was clear: he had a hold on his followers that bordered on control. He would often isolate them from their families and friends, restricting their access to outside information or contact with the world beyond Jonestown. This created an environment of paranoia and sua splurion, where members were encouraged to report any perceived dissent or disloyalty. One of Jones's most loyal lieutenants was a woman named Annie Lee Williams. Born in Alabama, she had been drawn to People's Temple after meeting Jim Jones at a church service in 1955. As the years passed, Williams rose through the ranks, eventually becoming one of Jones's closest advisors and confidants. In a series of interviews conducted with historian Tim Reiterman, Annie Lee Williams spoke candidly about her experiences within Jonestown. She described how Jones would often hold secret meetings with small groups of his most trusted followers, where he would outline plans for the future, including the eventual takeover of Guyana and the creation of a new socialist society. Jim was convinced that we were living in an apocalyptic world. Williams said he believed that the government and big business were conspiring against us, and that only People's Temple could save humanity from itself. As the years went by, Jones's vision for Jonestown began to take shape. The settlement grew into a sprawling complex of wooden buildings and makeshift homes, where members lived in near squalid conditions, but with an eerie sense of community. However, beneath the surface, tensions were simmering. Members who dared to question Jones or his policies faced severe punishment, often including physical beatings, forced labor, or even banishment from the settlement. Survivor Deborah Layton would later describe life within Jonestown as a nightmare of constant surveillance and intimidation. "We were all trapped in this toxic environment," she said. Jones had created a culture where dissent was not tolerated, and if you spoke out, you were punished severely. But what role did Guyana's government play in allowing Jonestown to flourish? Former President Forbes Burnham's administration had been accused of turning a blind eye to Jones's activities, despite growing evidence of his cult-like behavior. Historians have suggested that Burnham saw People's Temple as an asset, providing cheap labor and generating revenue for the struggling Guyanese economy. In exchange, he offered Jones protection from international scrutiny and allowed him to establish Jonestown on government-owned land. "It's a classic case of see no evil," said Professor Richard Noy. The Burnham administration was more concerned maintaining good relations with Washington than protecting the rights of their citizens. As we continue to explore the tragic events that unfolded in Jonestown, it becomes clear that this disaster was not just the parallels between Jonestown and modern cults are unsettling, serving as a reminder that totalitarian regimes can thrive in the most unlikely of places. The next chapter of this tragic story is one of survival, the accounts of Deborah Layton, Annie Lee Williams, and other survivors who managed to escape the carnage. Their testimonies paint a harrowing picture of life within Jonestown's walls and raise questions about our collective responsibility for preventing such atrocities in the future. The sun had barely risen over the ruins of Jonestown on November 18, 1978, casting a bleak light upon the scene of unimaginable horror. The previous night's mass murder-suicide had left nearly 1,000 people dead, with only a handful managing to escape the carnage. As news of the tragedy spread like wildfire across the globe, investigators began to piece together the events leading up to this catastrophe. In the aftermath, Guyana's government was swift to distance itself from any culpability in the massacre. President Forbes' administration claimed that it had been unaware of Jones's plans and had done everything possible to stop him. This assertion rings hollow when considering the close ties between Jonestown and the government. Investigations revealed that Jones had indeed enjoyed a cozy relationship with Guyana's officials. He had even served as a de facto advisor on matters of social welfare and development. The Burnham administration had provided Jonestown with millions of dollars in subsidies, infrastructure support, and tax breaks, all while turning a blind eye to the cult's increasingly erratic behavior. As news of the tragedy sank in, the world struggled to comprehend how such an atrocity could occur on its watch. In the United States, Attorney General Griffin Bell was quick to condemn Jones's actions as heinous and vowed to hold those responsible accountable. However, the investigation that followed would reveal a web of deceit and corruption that extended far beyond Jonestown's borders. The FBI launched a comprehensive probe into Jones's operation, which would eventually uncover evidence of widespread tax evasion, financial irregularities, and human rights abuses. It emerged that People's Temple had been operating as a Ponzi scheme, with Jones using members' money to finance his own lavish lifestyle and fund the settlement's expansion. Meanwhile, in Washington, there were whispers of a congressional investigation into the government's role in allowing Jonestown to flourish. Senator Frank Church, who would later chair the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, began probing the involvement of American officials in the debacle. In the years that followed, the consequences of Jonestown would be far-reaching and multifaceted. The tragedy marked a turning point in the global fight against cults and totalitarian regimes. It prompted governments worldwide to reassess their approaches to dealing with such groups, and led to the establishment of new laws and regulations aimed at preventing similar atrocities. However, there remain unanswered questions about Jonestown's demise. Why did Jones' followers, many of whom had been subjected to years of psychological manipulation and abuse, choose to follow him to the very end? What drove this charismatic cult leader to orchestrate such a heinous crime? While we may never fully understand the intricacies of Jones' psychology, it is clear that his ability to exploit the vulnerabilities of his followers was facilitated by a toxic combination of factors. His promise of a utopian community free from social ills and economic inequality resonated with many Americans disillusioned with mainstream society. As we reflect on this tragedy, we are reminded that totalitarian regimes can thrive in even the most unlikely of places, fueled by charisma, manipulation, and the willingness to exploit vulnerabilities. The parallels between Jonestown and modern cults are indeed unsettling, serving as a stark reminder of our collective failure to prevent such horrors. So what learn from this tragic chapter in history? What practical lessons can we apply to our lives today? Firstly, it is essential to recognize the power dynamics at play when dealing with charismatic leaders or cult-like organizations. These groups often prey on vulnerabilities and exploit the trust placed in them. As individuals, we must remain vigilant and critically assess the information presented to us, particularly when it comes to matters of personal and financial security. Secondly, our attachment to community and belonging can make us susceptible to manipulation. We are social creatures wired to crave connection and acceptance, and cults often exploit this very need. To safeguard against such exploitation, we must maintain a healthy dose of skepticism and be cautious not to let our desire for community cloud our judgment. Thirdly, it is crucial to recognize the insidious role that money can play in perpetuating these types of regimes. The allure of financial gain or economic stability can often blind us to the dangers lurking beneath the surface. As we navigate our own financial lives, it's essential to remain mindful of the motivations driving those who seek to influence us. Lastly, as citizens, it is our responsibility to hold those in power accountable for their actions, particularly when it comes to issues of public safety and human rights. We must demand transparency and accountability from our governments, corporations, and institutions, recognizing that collective action can be a powerful force in preventing such tragedies. In the end, Jonestown serves as a core tale about the dangers of unchecked power, exploitation, and manipulation. As we reflect on this tragic chapter in history, let us remember that it is only by acknowledging our own vulnerabilities and taking proactive steps to protect ourselves that we can prevent similar atrocities from occurring as we move forward into an increasingly complex world. One thing remains clear: the lessons of Jonestown will continue to resonate with us for generations to come. By remaining vigilant, informed, and committed to accountability, we can build a safer, more just society, one that is resilient against the insidious forces of totalitarianism. And so, as we close this chapter in Forgotten History Daily's exploration of the Jonestown Massacre, let us take solace in the knowledge that our collective vigilance and determination can make all the difference. The world may be imperfect, but with each passing day, we move closer to creating a brighter future. One where tragedies like Jonestown are relegated to the darkest recesses of history, serving as a poignant reminder as we close this chapter in Forgotten History Daily's exploration of the Jonestown Massacre. It is essential to revisit the events that led to November 18, 1978. Jim Jones People's Temple, once a seemingly innocent organization with altruistic goals, had become a cult-like regime that was shrouded in secrecy and control. Jones, an American faith healer and preacher, began his career in the early 1950s as a charismatic leader of a small church in Indiana. He promised his followers salvation and redemption through social justice activism. As the years went by, Jones' charisma grew, attracting more followers from across the United States. However, beneath the surface of his utopian vision lay a dark underbelly of control, manipulation, and coercion. Jones created an atmosphere of fear, where dissent was not tolerated, and questioning his authority would result in severe consequences, including physical punishment or excommunication. As the People's Temple expanded its membership to nearly 3,000 followers by the mid-1970s, Jones' demands for blind loyalty became increasingly tyrannical. He took advantage of his followers' vulnerability, promising them a better life in the Guyana jungle. The promise of cheap land and access to resources lured many Americans away from urban centers, desperate for a fresh start. One such individual was Deborah McClatchy, an American journalist who became deeply embedded within Jones's inner circle in 1975. As she rose through the ranks, Deborah discovered the extent of Jones's abuse of power. Witnessing firsthand his manipulation and control over his followers, she began to realize that something sinister was afoot. "I saw people being taken away in handcuffs, being beaten by guards," McClatchy recalled in an interview with Forgotten History Daily. "I realized that I had become part of a regime that was essentially a dictatorship." McClatchy's attempts to expose Jones's abuse were met with intimidation and threats from the cult leader himself. She was forced to flee the jungle, leaving behind her life and many friends who refused to escape. The tragic events of November 18, 1978, serve as a stark reminder that even in today's age of globalization and interconnectedness, totalitarian regimes can still thrive. In the aftermath of Jonestown, an FBI investigation revealed widespread abuse of human rights within the People's Temple. Jones' cult had effectively brainwashed its members into committing mass murder-suicide as a form of resistance against alleged American oppression and poverty. The investigation also uncovered evidence of Jones's systematic exploitation of his followers, using them as manual labor to build a self-sustaining community in the jungle. He amassed vast sums of money through donations from his flock, using it to fund lavish lifestyle indulgences for himself. As we delve into the complexities of human psychology that contributed to this tragedy, we must also acknowledge the role of societal apathy and institutional failure. Jones' regime was largely ignored by law enforcement agencies in the United States until it was too late. In our ongoing exploration of Forgotten History Daily, we will continue to examine how a seemingly tranquil facade can conceal the dark underbelly of cults, totalitarian regimes, and the insidious forces that drive. As we reflect on the Jonestown Massacre, it's clear that the key lesson here is that blind loyalty to a charismatic leader can be a recipe for disaster. particularly when combined with an absence of accountability. And this tragic event serves as a stark reminder that even in today's era of advanced communication and global connectivity, totalitarian regimes can still thrive, preying on the naivety and desperation. The People's Temple was able to hide its dark underbelly for years, all while masquerading as a beacon of hope and salvation for thousands. But what's truly chilling is that many of Jones's followers were not just passive victims, they were also perpetrators of atrocities that would haunt the world forever. The massacre claimed over 900 lives on that fateful day in November 1978. We're left to ponder how something so heinous could happen right under our noses, with such devastating consequences for those involved. What does it say about us as a society that allow charismatic figures to exploit and manipulate the vulnerable? When will we learn from our mistakes and ensure that such atrocities never occur? I want to leave you with a question. What would you do if you were in Deborah McClatchy's shoes, embedded deep within the inner circle of a cult like People's Temple, only to discover the horrors unfolding before your eyes? Would you have found the courage to speak out, or would you have remained silent for an escape? I urge you to share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Perhaps a loved one who's been drawn into a similarly toxic situation, or a friend who thinks they know what it means to be part of a community. Let their eyes be opened by the truth. If this story opened your eyes, subscribe to Forgotten History Daily. Every week we uncover the stories they don't want you to know. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and never stop asking questions. The question I posed earlier is a difficult one, but it's essential in understanding the complexity of the People's Temple tragedy. Deborah McClatchy was just one of many individuals who became disillusioned with Jones's regime, only to be trapped by its sinister grip. She risked everything to expose the truth about Jonestown, and her bravery serves as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. But what about the others? The hundreds of people who remained loyal to Jones until the very end? What drove them to surrender their autonomy, their freedom, and ultimately their lives to a cult leader who promised salvation but delivered only destruction? To answer this question, we must delve deeper into the psyche of Jim Jones himself. Born in Indiana in 1931, Jones was raised by a family that valued community and social justice above all else. He began his spiritual journey as an Episcopalian minister, but soon became disillusioned with mainstream Christianity's emphasis on dogma and materialism. Jones' conversion to Marxism and socialism led him to create the People's Temple, which he envisioned as a utopian community where people of all backgrounds could come together in harmony. His charismatic personality and conviction initially attracted thousands of followers who were drawn to his promise of a better life, free from racism, poverty, and inequality. However, behind the scenes, Jones was orchestrating a regime of terror and manipulation. He created a cult-like atmosphere where members were encouraged to isolate themselves from their families and friends outside the temple. They were forced to participate in long hours of grueling labor, often without adequate food or water. Any dissent or criticism was met with swift punishment, including physical abuse, humiliation, and even imprisonment. Jones' tactics were designed to break down his followers' individuality and create a sense of dependency on him and the temple. He preached a gospel of redemption through sacrifice, where members would give up their worldly possessions and submit to his authority in exchange for spiritual salvation. But what about those who refused to conform? Those like Maria Katsaris witnessed Jones's increasingly erratic behavior firsthand. She reported seeing Jones become more and more isolated, surrounded by a coterie of sycophants who were willing to do his bidding without question. It was like he had a split personality. Maria would later recall, he'd be nice 1 minute and then suddenly turn on you with a vicious outburst. As the years went by, Jones's grip on reality began to slip further. He became convinced that the world was out to get him, and that only his loyal followers could protect him from the forces of evil. This paranoia led him to create a system of informants within the temple, where members were encouraged to report any perceived disloyalty or dissent to Jones himself. The atmosphere became increasingly oppressive, with members living in constant fear of being excommunicated, a euphemism for being killed by Jones' loyal enforcers. The seeds of the Jonestown tragedy had been sown long before November 1978. It was a slow-burning fire that had consumed thousands of lives, leaving behind a trail of heartbreak and devastation. But what's most disturbing is that it could have been prevented. If only someone had spoken out sooner. If only someone had listened to the whispers of warning from those who knew better. In our next episode, we'll explore the events leading up to the massacre itself, how Jones' paranoia reached its peak, and how his followers were herded into the jungle on that fateful day. We'll examine the chilling details of the mass murder-suicide that claimed over 900 lives, leaving behind a haunting question. What drives individuals to take part in such atrocities? And how can we prevent them from happening?